Hey everyone, this is Max, and I want to thank you for joining me in another tutorial video. So this is going to be the 6th video in our Mixamo Maya series. And it's going to be a continuation of what we did in the last video, working with the idle animation, but working with the walking animation. Since we went over some of the basic parts in the last video of exporting the animations out of Mixamo, we're not going to go through every single step. We'll be more focusing on just being in Maya and working with and kind of looking at the differences between these two different types of motion. So the walking in place animation is probably what you're going to see more in a lot of game design, where the character is actually moving throughout space, and based on different levels of acceleration, the animations will switch between walking, running, sprinting, where usually when you're animating in a scene for a cinematic, you're going to be actually moving the character throughout the space because they're actually interacting with the space in a very controlled way, where that's not going to obviously be the case in a game. So we're going to be kind of working with how you could kind of work with both versions of the characters and the differences between them. So what we're going to do first, you can see right now it appears to be looping just because it's actually going to the end of the animation and starting over. But right now nothing is looping, so if we were to go past 31 frames, we're going to see nothing's happening. Right, so one thing to note is, this walk animation, when looped properly, it could just walk forward forever, where this one would just be walking in place. As you can see, it is right now. But if we want to move it, what I'd recommend is making sure you understand how far you need to be moving this character, because if we were to just move the global control like you would in a game, for this sake, you're going to want to make sure it's making sense and matching to the speed of the character. So the nice thing is that since we actually have the walking in place one, we could actually compare the distance that it would need to travel. So what I'm going to do is I'll start a keyframe on the global control, and you're going to see here, if I wanted to match this up, I can try to get as close as I can. If I want to be very exact, what I could do is I can go to one of our orthographic views. So it's going to be under panels, and we can go to orthographic, and you go front or side. What you could also do is hold space, hold the right mouse button down, and you could also go to your views this way. So we go to a right view, we'll hit F and we'll see our characters. Now you can see I just kind of want to line this up where it looks like it's pretty much matched up. So we see it's around 200 frames. So if I key this up just so we can compare, you'll see how this looks. Now one thing you could be noticing is that there's a build up and slow down that's happening, and that's because Maya makes it so every keyframe is set in auto. It's a form of tangent that'll make it so everything speeds up, or has a kind of ramp up time, speeds up in the center and slows down at the end. That's generally what you want for a lot of animation, because of the fact that it's going to make it look a lot more natural, because things will do that. Normally something isn't going to just start moving at a constant speed, but in this case we actually do want it because it makes it look really weird with the feet, that the feet are moving but not actually pushing forward. So what you could do is, since we have that global control selected, go under Window, Animation, Graph Editor. We'll select these, again, it's just for the global control, and we'll make sure that is linear. So now when we're moving, we're going to see the character is actually moving and looking like they're actually pushing off their feet while the character's moving. So this will actually make it look really natural. Now the one thing with this, again, it's really dependent that you actually get the amount of space timed out properly for the animation. That's why it's kind of nice having this as a comparison in here, so you know how much you should be moving it. So what we're going to do is show what would happen if you got it wrong, and why it's really important to time this out. So let's say here, instead of 200, we do 400. I'm going to double the amount of space we're trying to cover with this walk. So we'll key this out, and it's still linear. We're going to see now the amount of space that it's covering based off the animation movement is going to look really weird, because it's almost feels like now the character's gliding throughout space because they're not actually making those contact points and actually pushing off like this character is. So just a couple of things to kind of point out when working with the two. Now, the nice thing with this one, if you're just doing like longer walking sequences, this character's already built to kind of do that and just kind of walk forever. With this one, you're probably gonna have a little bit more control with kind of telling the character to stop, and continue moving. There's going to be more to it than just that. Right, so that kind of covers just like our comparison section. What we'll do now is go through kind of working with them individually in their scenes and setting them up that way. And working with how to also work with multiple versions of the characters in the scene at once. So we'll just kind of start with the walking in place one. So I'm going to make a new scene. I'm going to go to open scene, and I want to open up the assets folder, Mixamo control rig, and our kind of default character to start with. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is open up our control rig script, go to animate, import animation to control rig. I'm going to go to our data folder by using this button to go back. And we're just going to go for the walking in place one first. Alright, so you're going to see that all snapped in. Again, if you're running into issues with the animations not snapping to the character, make sure you watch the last video. I go over a section that's in, it's kind of marked out by time slots, that you can see what to do when that happens. Alright, so we can see here the character's moving. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to bake this out. Okay, so now that that's baked out, we can see that all the characters have keyframes on them. I recommend doing is if you want to work with multiple characters in one scene, I would save at this point. You can do the looping first. You could also do it in the scene together, but I definitely recommend doing this part first so you're not trying to bake in animations with multiple characters in the scene at once. Definitely run into some issues trying to work on that. So I'd say, let's save this one out, save scene, I'll go to my scenes folder, and I have my different walking animations here. And I'm just making different folders to kind of group stuff up. You can group this even more if you want to separate out the walking animations that are walking throughout space versus the ones that are kind of looping in place if you want to. Right now I would just save this one here. I already have these all saved out. It'll be included in the project folder. So I'm not going to save over this, but you just save this here so that way you can import this in to have multiple characters all walking with their baked in animations. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that file. I went a little bit too far back. I'm going to go to our walk animations, and we'll go for the one that's in place. Right, so one thing you can notice here is that we're getting the file name in front of this. This can be kind of hard when you're trying to go through and read different folders because it's putting a lot of words in front of what you're mainly looking for. So we can do to clean that up is you can go to Windows, General Editors, and go to Namespace Editor. And what we can do is we can just select it, hit delete. Once you delete the main branch, you'll see a bunch of files afterwards. If you want to delete these just to keep everything clean, you don't have to do it one at a time. You can actually hold shift, select all of these now that there's no parenting happening through groups, and just hit delete. And I'm just merging with root. And you'll just do this for how many files there are. You'll just hit it over and over until it's gone. One thing to note in terms of organization, the display editor will generally get pretty crazy if you start importing a lot of characters at once, just because it'll be control layer 1, 2, and they're going to keep kind of building in front of each other in order. So this can get pretty messy and a little bit hard to kind of work with. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to use this a lot. Right, so now we can see this looks a lot cleaner, a lot easier. So what we can do now is go to our global control and just kind of move over that second character that we have. Right, and then we can see they're both walking. And we'll go over some things you can do to kind of change these and kind of alter this up a little bit. All right, so again, we haven't looped anything yet, so we should go through and set up the looping for this. So what I'm going to do is I'll start with the first character. And again, right now, everything else is referenced, so the controls will be the only thing selected. But if you need to, and what we did in the last video, you could turn all these off, so that way you're only selecting controls. Select this one. I'm going to go under Windows, Animation, Graph Editor. Right, and we can see all the controls that were baked in per key for this character. All right, so what I'm going to do is we'll select everything in here, and you want to go to curves, and we have pre and post. So the difference between this is post infinity is after 0, and pre infinity is before 0. And then there's two options here that we're mainly going to be using in this video: cycle and cycle with offset. So cycle will make it where when you have a perfectly looping animation, it'll just play over and over. If we were to use cycle on the walking through space animation, what's going to happen is it's actually going to loop, but it's going to be looping with like a teleporting look where it's going to walk to the end of its animation, shift back to the beginning, and walk like that. So it's going to be almost like teleporting back and forth, which might be interesting if it's something you're going to go for your scene. But if you wanted to make something work where there's like an offset here where it needs to take into account that it's not necessarily a seamless loop, you would do cycle offset. But for these, since they are perfectly looping for the actual animation, we're just going to use cycle. All right, and for right now, we'll start with post cycle, and I'll show a reason why we might want to use pre-infinity cycle. So do post infinity cycle. See now, if I were to extend this out, we'll see that the one on, well, our left, but the character's right, will now continually walk. The other one is not doing that yet. So what we could do now is we could select this character and do the same thing. Curves, post infinity cycle, and now they'll both be perfectly looping. And again, you could do this with as many characters if you want in a scene, and actually do a pretty cool build up with kind of having scenes with groups walking or different things to kind of make a scene feel a little bit more alive. There are other programs you could use that are meant to do crowd simulation, but I've never found any that were free to use. So this is kind of like a DIY version of kind of doing that if you have a simpler scene that you're kind of working with. If you are doing something where it's really complex, you're going to want to look into using one of those crowd simulation softwares. All right, so one thing we're noticing here when looking at this is that the animation, the characters are walking perfectly in sync. And more realistically, that's not going to be the case. It's going to happen when the characters are actually walking a little bit out of sync. So what we can do here is we can actually shift this. So we'll have this character selected. Still, we'll go Windows, Animation Graph Editor. What we could do is we could select all of these. And then if you hold Shift and drag in the direction you want, we're going to go left and right. We could actually pull this out, and by holding Shift, it's going to make it where you can't alter anything by pushing it up or down, kind of changing the way the animation looks, but just changing when that animation starts. So we can offset this animation just a little bit. So now they won't be perfectly in sync, but what we're going to notice is when we go to play this, nothing's happening for this character in this point in time that we moved it forward, because right now this is kind of like the 0 frame that we said post infinity cycle. So what we're going to want to do to change that is go curves pre-infinity cycle, and now we can see that the character is going to be doing this animation but also before 0. So now we can see that we have two characters walking and they're not perfectly in sync, so it's going to look a little bit more natural that they're walking, but not necessarily like soldiers walking at the exact same tune, but just more casually walking. And again, if we wanted to make these characters walk throughout space, all we'd have to do is we'll just start at 0. And we already kind of did this study in the last one where we're comparing the two. You would just key this up. We'll move forward to the 31 frame mark, so we know that's how long the animation is. And then we'll drag these forward a little. And then they'll translate Z, we'll do 200. We'll then key this. What we'll do is then go Windows, Animation, Graph Editor again. We'll select these animations, and then we'll want to make it so that way we make these linear. So again, they're not doing that kind of ramp up while they're still walking still. And we can do curves, post infinity, and we'll just cycle with offset. And we'll just do this just in case, because the other one might need it, in case we were to ever move this around. So now we can see that the characters will be walking throughout space forever at their alternating animation timing. And as long as we don't run out of keyframes, then it'll start over. But yeah, so that's just kind of the basics of how to work with the characters if you're doing the walking in place method. Alright, so what we're going to do now is actually jump into the walking through space version and start working with that. Right, and if this has been helpful so far, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you're running into any issues. I could try to help solve those in the comments or address them with another video if it seems to be something that's affecting a lot of people. And if you have any suggestions for other videos, make sure to leave those in the comments. And if it's something that I have the time to get to and is in my skill range, I could look to try and incorporate that into future series or future videos. All right, so what we can do now is go to a new scene. We'll kind of go through the same process again. So we'll open the scene, we'll go to our assets, Mixamo control rig. Import our animation. I'm going to go to our data folder, and then we'll just do the normal walking. So this will begin going through space. We'll bake this in. Alright, we can see there's keyframes on the character. From here, it says save this one out. Your scenes folder. And what you do is you just save this under walking animation, and it'll be the through space one. And you just save over this file. So what I'm going to do is, since we went through how to clean everything up, I'm just going to cut to a scene where they're both in the scene ready to go, so we can start working with them that way to save a little bit of time. Just want to make sure we go through the process of setting up these characters, so that part sticks in. Alright, hey everyone, we're back now to our starting point. Again, this is both characters that have been imported in with the walking through space animation. Right, and I just cleaned them up using Windows, General Editors, Namespace Editor, making sure they're all kind of cleaned up and easier to work with. So from here, what we're going to want to do is I'm going to show what happens if we loop this, but we only do this cycle without cycle of offset. So go curves, post infinity cycle, and I'll extend this one out. So if we were to cycle this without the offset, it's going to continue, but you can see it's going to teleport back once it finishes. Now if we do this curves, post infinity cycle of offset, we're going to see now that it actually just continues walking forward. And it'll just do this continuously. Right, so since we did find out that when altering the animations, if we were to pull them forward so they're not walking at the same pace, we're going to want to probably also just do pre-infinity cycle of offset, and we'll do this for both characters. So curves post-infinity cycle of offset, curves pre-infinity cycle of offset. And then we could take this and kind of change it up so they're not walking at the same pace. We can do shift, middle mouse drag. We'll drag this forward a little bit. You can see with this one, it's not just that it's changing its space, it's also changing where it's starting. So this can be nice if you want to kind of alter them too. You could do this with this other one just by changing where this one is at when walking, by just moving this global control rig. All right, so now we can see that the characters will be walking and they're not in unison, and you can do this with as many characters as you want. We'll just add a few more to like 800 frames. You should see that they're just going to kind of walk off into space forever. So again, from this point, we've pretty much been able to do everything that's exactly the same with the two different types of animations. Is you can actually change the pathway that the character's moving by altering these. You want to be careful because if you do too much, it'll look kind of funny. So I could show you an example of this. So let's say we wanted to alter these so they're not just walking straight, their paths are changing. So you could do is we could key this, and we'll just go to 31 because that was the kind of frame we're working with. And we will rotate this. We'll do about 30 degrees. And what we can do is we don't want this kind of building up, so we just want this to be linear. So I want to make sure you're not actually looping it and what will happen is they'll do their turn, but then they'll keep on this direction when walking forward. If you do make the amount that they're turning too high, it still will look really weird, so you kind of got to play with the number. 30 was something I found to work pretty well. That looks pretty natural still with the amount of turn they're taking. But again, when you start looping it, they start like spinning in circles. So just something to be careful of. Right, well, I hope this was helpful and you're able to kind of follow along and go through this process with your own characters. In the next video, we're going to be going over working with creating clips and the time editor and how to kind of merge clips together for blending. So not just working with one single animation kind of looping forever, but how to kind of combine like an idle with a walk with a running. So we'll be starting to go through that process in the next video. I hope this was helpful for wherever you're watching this, and that you have a great night, morning, evening, whatever time it is. Right, and I'll see you in the next video. Make sure you subscribe for future content and follow me on the social platforms linked below.